Okay, this is going to be a video on drawing some basic forms. We're going to use one-point perspective, so I'm going to start by drawing an eye level close to the top of my paper. So I'm going to make sure that that is nice and straight and parallel to that top edge of the paper. Okay, so now I'm going to put my vanishing point roughly in the middle. And I'm going to start with a box over here. So I'm going to draw that. I'm going to recommend that you draw your square freehand first. Actually, I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. So I'm going to be fitting 4 different objects across the page, but I can stagger them a little bit. So I'll go ahead and make this a little bit bigger just so it is nice and easy to see on the page, and we're going to be doing some shading, so we don't want it to be too tiny. All right, so once you think you have a pretty good square, that's when I would then go back and use the ruler as needed to firm things up. So if you draw it freehand first, the advantage to that is that you can see what you're doing, and you can make sure that the lines that you draw with your ruler really are parallel to the edges of your paper. If you try to just put your ruler down and draw, the ruler itself kind of gets in the way, and it can be a little bit tricky. So I always use my ruler after I kind of know what I want my square to look like. All right, so as we learned the other day, we're going to use our vanishing point, and we're going to connect each corner of our box to our vanishing point. Okay, and one more down here at the bottom. And then you get to decide how big you want this box to be. So place a horizontal line. Make sure that really is horizontal, so it should be parallel and parallel to these other lines. And your vertical line. So again, make sure that truly is vertical. And you can use your ruler then as needed to help you finish that up. And the whole time you just want to double check that you really do have those verticals and horizontals parallel, so I can check that kind of up here, that it's really making a right angle with that line up there. Okay. And once I have finished drawing my box, I can get rid of those orthogonal lines. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to be adding some shading to that, but for now we've got our basic box. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start now a cylinder. So I'm going to start by lining this up. Okay, so that's going to be the center of my cylinder, wherever I want to position my cylinder. Again, making sure that I really have this a true vertical line, and I think I may have gotten it a little bit off, so just move that a little bit. I'm going to try to stagger these, like I said, so I'm going to put this down a little bit further. I can start with just this first line, this first horizontal line, and it's going to make your life easier if you do make sure this is symmetrical, so you can actually measure that if you'd like. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to just start with that and then connect each edge up here. So there are different ways that we can draw a cylinder based on whether we're looking at one or whether we're kind of imagining one like this. Since we're imagining this, I'm just going to start it like this. So I decided where I want this top of my cylinder to be, and then I am making my connection to the opposite corners here, and that should line up right at that center. So that was why I did go ahead and measure this first, just to make sure that everything was going to line up evenly. And I'll draw my horizontal line through that center. So notice, just like we learned in the video earlier, that center line is a little bit further back than what visually is the center, because we're seeing this as a square that is in perspective. So this edge is closer to us, this edge is farther away. So we can go ahead and put those dots in. And then I'm just making a smooth arc, smooth curve to connect them, and that's going to get you your top of your cylinder. And then I'm just going to drop that down from there. Okay. And then rather than going through this for the bottom as well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a line. So kind of make that basically a rectangle at the bottom, and I'm going to use that to guide how I want my ellipse to be on there. So we know that this is going to be a little bit of a deeper curve here if we were to go through all of this. So rather than do all of this that time around, I'm just going to use this straight line to kind of anchor my ellipse. And I'm going to just kind of roughly estimate my ellipse there. So as long as this curve of the ellipse either matches this curve here or it's a little bit deeper, we're good. If the bottom of my cylinder looks flatter than this curve on the cylinder, then that's going to look odd to us. So remember when we were doing parallel projection and we just kind of did our front plane of our box and then our back plane and we just connected them. You can do a very, just kind of estimated simple cylinder by doing the same basic thing with two ellipses. Now that one did turn out just a little bit flatter than the top one, so I'm just redrawing that and making sure that bottom curve either matches, or if it's a little bit curvier, then that'll look right to your eye. Okay, so I've got this. I'm going to get rid of that kind of guideline that I added for myself. I'm going to get rid of this guideline. So that guideline was just making sure that our the edges of our cylinder were even, so it doesn't sort of like look like it's tilting to the side in some kind of weird way. Up here, I'm going to get rid of my guidelines. So I'm going to be left with just the outlines of my cylinder. So that opposite side of the ellipse, that would be hidden by this front plane. And you just want to double check at the end, stand up or sit up or hold that out from you at arm's length, and just make sure that that looks relatively even. So you can use your ruler at the end to make sure those are straight. Again, you really want to make sure that these lines don't appear to angle, so that can look a little bit odd. And I'm just going back and just erasing as much as I need to, and then redrawing just to clean this up. All right, so we've got two of our forms. We're now going to draw another form. We're going to draw a cylinder, and we're going to, I'm going to freewheel on this one. So I'm going to just draw my ellipse. Now, if you need to go through and kind of do the whole kind of creating your square in perspective, and you could do that coming over to this, but it gets a little bit harder to see, so I'm just going to pretend I'm looking at it straight on because it's not going to make a difference at the end. So you can go through this and use that same method to create your ellipse if you're struggling to kind of get that shape, because it is a little odd. It's not quite an oval. So if you need to go through that, you can. But I'm actually going to turn this into a cone. So I'm going to have my line going up, and we're going to kind of break one of our lines, one of our rules that we had when we were learning about one-point perspective. We are going to have some angles that would intersect this at a different point. But the reason for that is these are not ones that are going straight back that we're seeing in perspective. These are the actual edges of the cone, which are going to come up like that. And I might actually make that a little bit taller. I feel like my proportions are a little funny. So as I'm continuing this, I'm just making sure I have that line in the center, so your line of symmetry, and you're just going to choose how tall your cone is going to be, and then you're just going to connect the top of the cone down to the side of the ellipse until you're happy with your cone. So as long as you get that center really centered, your cone should come out all right. And actually, I think mine's tilting a little bit, so we'll retry that again. So There you go. One of the nice things about this video is you can see, yes, I also have to try things a couple of times before I get them how I want them. So try and try again until you get it how you want it. Okay, so I think I got my line of symmetry nice and straight that time. So now I'm going to have my cone. And I just erased those lines that I don't need. Okay, now I'm going to do a couple of spheres. Okay, so do a couple of spheres. I'm going to teach you this trick in class, but the space between these two holes that I've made in this piece of paper is going to be half the width of my sphere, or in other words, it'll be the radius of my sphere. Okay, so I might have to try that a couple of times, but I should get a pretty good circle out of that. And I did say I wanted to do this a couple of times, so I will do another one down here. Making sure I position this so that I can fit it. Slipping a little bit, but kind of find where the kind of average of where that was supposed to be. Okay, so I've got a couple of circles there, and I can turn those into spheres. All right, we are going to shade these, and we had talked earlier about shading in such a way that we were going to meet these edges. So we're going to try to do that pretty well here. And I am going to give this a tabletop, I think, before I do that. Suppose we could just keep this line, this eye line, our tabletop line, but I'm going to actually place one that's a little bit lower. Because a lot of times if you're sitting at a table, your eye line is going to be above the line of that table, right? So I think I'm making that a little crooked. Let's try that again. So I'm going to use these lines over here to make sure I have that lined up and not crooked like I did at the beginning. So I just chose a place where I thought this would visually look okay. I cannot place it so that it is below any of these objects, so these objects actually have to sit, but I did want it to kind of try to run through a couple of them. I think we got that this time. All right, so as I'm shading this, I'm going to make the decision that our light is going to come from this corner. So I'll just put that in just to kind of remind myself that that's where our light is coming from. So basically from the side over here. So thinking about that, I'm going to have a decent amount of light on the top, but less light over here. So a lot of what we're doing when we shade is just thinking about comparing different spaces, so creating contrast. So I'm just being careful to start at these edges when I'm shading. So I'm going to wind up with these very crisp edges. So as I'm doing this, one of the things that I also need to think about, if I'm going to put a cast shadow here, which one do I want to have darker and which one do I want to have lighter? And I actually have some reference photos that I've lined up for you to look at, and I'm going to look at them here as well. So I've got my model for this box, so I'm going to make my cast shadow a little bit darker, and you can also see some variation here on the box. So this does get a little darker as it goes back. It's definitely, this shadow here is darker than on this plane, so we can use some of those cues to help us with our drawing too. So when I'm putting this in, it's gonna just come across here, and this angle will make it a fairly short shadow. We could have it come behind here if we want. If we want to make it a longer shadow. I'm going to keep these lines really light though, wherever I want to put it. So if I want to put it close or if I want to put it longer, maybe I'll split the difference. And even my shadow line would go to that vanishing point, so I'll clean that up a little bit. But again, I don't want this to be have really heavy edges. So shadows do not have really heavy edges. So whereas normally I would create a buffer zone here for a shadow, we often have soft edges. So I can actually purposely run counter to those edges and let those be a little bit softer. And so that is part of the reason then we don't want to have these hard edges on the shadow. The edges of your shadow are not going to be darker. All right, so notice I'm turning direction. So I'm making a lot of my marks here horizontal, and that is going to help you create that illusion that this ground is in fact a ground. So if I had continued with all of my lines going this way, that would kind of hurt my illusion that the ground was laying down and kind of make my ground pop back up at us. All right, so even when I'm going fast, I'm making sure these lines are pretty short. If they start to curve or kind of go wonky in any way, that's going to ruin that illusion. So you want to keep them short enough that they stay nice and straight. So they're just creating that illusion. So, and notice I'm making this nice and dark. So you can switch up your pencils anytime you need to. Since we're starting to shade, we're going to have a paper towel out so that I'm not ruining what I'm doing as I'm shading it. So I might start to use my 2B pencil or my ebony pencil in here to get some of these darker darks in my shadows. Since I've now done that, I can get in here. I've created this buffer zone down here with that shadow. So this can help me stay right in line with my shading. So again, using what we learned earlier about these darker shadows are going to appear to go back in space, these darker shades, darker values. I can let it get a little bit darker as it goes toward the back of the box. And I'm going to break out another tool here. You can also, if you want, use your graphite stick or the side of your pencil here if you would like to help you fill in some of these areas a little bit faster. And you can, of course, use your blending tool, and then once your blending tool has some value on it, this can then also be used to apply value. So I'm going to go back and make sure that these edges are still nice and crisp. And I can introduce you so I'm adding a little bit of shading back there, being careful of that edge. One of the things, though, that we can also do is start to use the negative space. So that was what I was starting to say, that I can also introduce you to that idea of using the negative space as well as you're creating some of these edges. So I can actually go darker in this background, for example. So I think I'm going to actually go back and maybe instead of shading that quite as dark, I'll let this have a little more light on it. And I'm just going to let the negative space do the work a little bit more. And I was looking for my ebony pencil. I just found that. So again, I want to make sure that if I did that side plane pretty dark, I'm going to go even darker with this ebony. And if I need to, I can also go into this edge, and I could even make it a little bit lighter, just making sure that I still have contrast. Once I have some of that background shaded a little bit, I can use the side of my graphite stick. So I need to make sure that I connect these though. So I'm going over that area that I did with my pencil with the graphite stick and vice versa. So I'm just connecting those areas. I might just make these little hatch marks, getting further apart as I go up into this area. And I can apply the same type of idea using the negative space. I can apply that around the front edges of the box as well. So I'm making sure that I want to make sure that this edge is nice and even, so I'm just cleaning that up a little bit with my eraser. So, and anywhere here where I might still have sketchy lines, I'm going to make sure that those disappear. So I might need to go in with an eraser before I shade, or I might cover some of that in the shading itself. So I'm creating that buffer zone again. So I'm going with the edges here. So once I have that buffer zone, then I can change directions. Let's see, a hard time keeping this in the frame here. Okay, so hopefully we didn't lose too much, but I'm just going around all these edges and then just following the edge. But then once I have that buffer zone, I would then change direction. So again, I'm going horizontally so I can really create that illusion